Guilloche. Guilloche.
Hi everyone, and welcome to our channel. In this episode, I'd like to take a look at a decorative technique called Guilloche, as well as a short, real quick view of the Photo VCarve toolpath that's within the softwares of both Aspire and VCarve. You may recognize the design style of Guilloche from using a spirograph, a toy that's been around for many, many years. It's an interlocking design that's very attractive in many cases. The style is also used for security seals, dollar bills, legal documents. It's hard to duplicate. So to get started, we would open up our normal sessions of our software. In this case, I'm using VCarve. And to create a circular vector, I then want to have 26 segments of this circle. So I found the easiest way is to draw a straight vector, copy and rotate that 26 times. So each section is 1/26th of the circle. I could take those vectors, rotate them, delete all but the top two, and then use my snipping tool to remove the circle and then the straight line vectors, which I don't need anymore. I now have that 1/26th segment of the circle. My next step is to draw an oval. All of the design elements are flexible. You can choose what you like. I happen to be making this up as I go along. Just to show you the techniques and some options of how things can be done. I select the oval and then the segment of the circle, and I'm going to copy it along that vector 8 times. If you wonder why I chose 8, I really only want 6, but I want a space between each of the groupings of 6. So we'll delete what we don't need, and I'll delete the end 2 ovals, the one on the left and the one on the right. That's my section of ovals that I want to keep. I'm going to group them together. Now, I need 26 of these around the circle. We could change colors if we want. Part of this process is the management and use of layers and colors. To get 26 copies of this around the circle, what would you use? The circular copy or copy along a vector? I wasn't sure, so I tried both, with interesting results. So this is the original, and now I'm going to try the circular copy. Simply choosing the ovals, the group of ovals, clicking on the icon to copy around the center of my workspace 26 times. Pretty easy. So let's try if we copy along the circular vector. It should be the same, right? Well, let's take a look. Here's my original set of vectors. I'm going to copy along that circular vector 26 times. And we'll take a look at the end results. I'm going to move them to a new layer so I don't get confused. Hide the original. And here's my end result. I'll change the color so maybe you can see a little closer of the end results. That's the copy along vector. That's the original. The next one is circular copy. which looks the same as the original. And now for the copy along vector. There is a difference. So just as a note, if you're not getting the results you're asking for, it may be part of the software. I like the end result of copy along vector, so that's what I chose. There are no absolutes in creating this. It's all about the design and the end results. So I choose the grouped vectors of ovals and copy them along the circle 26 times. As I go through the process, I'll be creating quite a few vectors and then deleting them simply because I don't need them anymore. They're more for construction. I select all of the ovals and then I select the large circle, and I'm going to use the Trim Objects tool. And I'm going to delete everything within that circle. And that gives me my little outside border. Rather quick, rather easy. The next step is selecting the circle and offsetting it slightly. And I build up the design item by item, piece by piece. I offset the circle several times, again, just for reference points and guidelines and construction lines. Eventually, I think they all get deleted. I'm going to draw another oval that will span two of these circles. When I'm happy with the size, width, and height, I'm going to move it off to the side. I don't need to keep my vectors always within my workspace. Otherwise it gets awfully crowded and it's hard to determine which is going to be the important ones to use. I'm going to use the same copy along the vector tool that I used previously, and I just chose a random number, something that looked right. I hide that new set of vectors only so that I can select the circle that I want, and I'm going to copy it to that layer, layer number 4. Select all the vectors that are visible, and using the Trim tool, it's the last vector you use that will be considered the boundary of what's kept and what's not. I used this tool in the previous video of stacked text with 3D components. As we develop this, I changed the colors of the vectors so I can actually visibly see how things are turning out. For the center section, I draw a vertical line, a vertical vector, and again, I'm going to copy it around the center 26 times. This time I want to add a little undulating shape, but I don't know how big that undulation should be, but I'm going to start with an oval. But how big should the oval be? Well, the distance between the two vectors is 0.7837. So let's make an oval, uses that number as its width. Stretching an oval out to see what it looks like. I could have inputted the numbers directly, but I wasn't sure about the height of it. So when I get close to what I think it looks right, I'm going to change the width to just 0.78. And I'm happy with the width. Now I need to flatten out the ends, so I can click on the N key to enter the node edit mode, grab one of the little handles of the ending node, and flatten it out. Sometimes if you're not accurate, one side will look slightly different than the other. You can enter the node editing mode and hover over the center node and hit the C key to cut it, and then delete one side. Take the remaining side and mirror it around the center of your workspace and join them together. That way you're guaranteed that it's an equal and matching design. But here's another way of doing it. I can draw my oval to whatever size is necessary, enter into the node editing mode, and delete the bottom arc of the oval, the left side, and then the right side. I select both of the handles on the end nodes by holding my Shift key down, hit the H key on the keyboard, and use my arrows to adjust those handles simultaneously. This is obviously a lot more efficient and a faster way of doing this, but I thought I'd show you both ways. So now that I have my undulation, I lower it down to the top of my vertical vector, and I'm going to again circular copy 26 times around the center of my workspace. I group them together just so that I can manage them easier, but now I want to join them. And unfortunately, I can't join grouped vectors, so I need to ungroup them, and then I can join them together as a singular vector. I keep going back to my Layer tab so I can check how the design is coming out. Next up, the logo. I'm going to import my EPS file that has the vectors that I've created for our logo. Center it within the design, and I think I'm happy with this. Let's take one of the circles and just stretch it out a little bit. I'm going to use this circle, parts of it, for some text. Text on a curve. That's the next step in the process. We create some text, and we're going to align it to some of the circles and arcs that we have. I take one of the circles and cut it apart, so I have two arcs, an upper and lower, that I then am going to take my text and align it to. You can do the same, top of the arc, center, or bottom. All in all, it's not a very complicated process, but there just happens to be a lot of steps that are needed. I decided to add the USA to our name and address of the town, simply because we do work around the world. I'm never quite sure where our next job is going to come from. So I wanted to indicate that we are located in the United States. That circle that I stretched out from the logo, I'm going to cut it apart, and we're going to use the text on a curve tool again. Hovering over a node and hitting the C key will cut it apart. And then hovering over the span and hitting the D key will delete that small section. Is it important to delete? Not necessarily, but it just helps me see where things are. More text. These are some of the products and items that we deal with. A lot of stained glass work, both new stained glass, restoration of stained glass windows. We do some mosaics, the old-fashioned way, as well as some woodworking. Back to our text on a curve, adjusting the height as need be. As I've said earlier, there's no set rules. It's whatever looks right. Sometimes on my computer, parts of the screen are deleted. I think it's my video card. I'm not sure if other people have this issue. I know that's there. I just have to wait for the computer to catch up. I wanted to leave this part in the video just to let you know that it may happen, and it's not that big of an issue. As I said, I think it's more the problem with my computer than it is with the software. I start to delete the vectors that are no longer needed. Simply clicking on the vector and hitting the delete key will remove them. I'm going to take my undulating line that I created earlier, and we're going to offset it. We'll offset it outwards one time. And then selecting the original undulating line. and offsetting it inward. I'm not exactly sure how many times to offset it, so I try it until it looks right. Delete the undulating lines that go on top of my words. And I'm going to use that trim tool again. I select my green ovals and my undulating line and delete everything within that last vector of the undulating line. You'll notice I'm using this tool quite a bit in this example. The same thing with the undulating lines and where they overlap the logo. Select the undulating lines, then the closed vectors of the logo, and delete what's inside of it. Remember, the last vector you choose is the bounding vector that will trim either outside of it or inside of it. And I'll repeat this process until all of the excess vectors are removed from overlapping the logo. I can start to change the colors of the vectors so I get a better look at what it is. There's my logo. There's my undulating lines. Checking to make sure I got them all. I think it would be quite difficult to do this if all the vectors were placed on one layer. I then need to delete the oval vectors from where the words are, simply because I want the words to be more visible. A couple different ways this could have been done. I chose to select the circular vector, enter the node editing mode, and hover over a spot where I want to insert a node by hitting the I key, and then hitting the C to cut it apart. Another way that this could have been accomplished was by drawing a vector from the center point out beyond and through the two circles, and then using the snipping tool, the scissors. Because in the end, I want to have the two arcs, the top and the bottom, visible and connected with a straight vector to create closed vectors around the words. How you get to the end is not necessarily as important as the end results. I select my green ovals, and then holding the Shift key down, select that closed vector box around the words and delete everything inside of it. Both for the top name as well as the bottom. I keep going back and reviewing my choices, and I'm happy with it so far. I think the next step would to actually be creating toolpaths. Just for ease, I'm going to hide my words, because my thought process is I'm going to be V-carving those. And for these vectors, I'm going to be using a profile toolpath with a V-bit. A very shallow depth, not too much because the vectors are very close to one another. And we can preview it. Change the color. And if we're happy with that, we go into the next set. The next would be for the logo. Selecting the vectors of the logo, using a larger V-bit, and using the VCarve toolpath. And lastly, the names and places, and our descriptive words of the services we offer. It will be a V-carving as well, but with our smaller V-bit, like our first one that we used. And preview the toolpath. When I got this far, I looked at it and I thought to myself, well, it's okay, but it still needs some more stuff. It's not as full of design as I would have thought. So let's add some more vectors. Again, this process could have been accomplished a couple different ways. Here's just one. I drew two vectors, a vertical and one at a 45-degree angle, simply because the end result of the design is going to be rotated around our center. I wanted to make sure that the vectors aligned. I choose the bottom vector and mirror it over the center. I choose the top vector and mirror that as well. I could have chosen both at the same time and only done this process once. I then want to join them together, so I have a single vector at the top and a single vector at the bottom. I'm going to draw a straight line and make 10 copies. Using a slight offset. With those vectors selected, I'm going to use the distort tool, but I'm going to distort those lines between two curves. With those distorted curves now selected, I'm going to move them to its own layer. Simply because I want to be able to select them easier, but not get rid of too many vectors. Take those vectors, circular copy 4 times, and then join them together. That tolerance number that's within this window is important. I know I have now 40 vectors, but if they were joined correctly, there should be only 10. So I need to make sure that whatever the tolerance is that gives me the end results of 10 joined vectors, that would be the number I want. I select those vectors, and then my closed boxes that were around the words, if you remember, and delete everything inside of those closed boxes. That way these new design lines don't interfere with the words. Once I've done that, I go over to my Toolpath side and choose my profile again with the small V bit, just to scratch the surface. Preview the toolpath. My first attempt, it came out a little bit light. So I'm going to go back into the toolpath and adjust the cut depth. And there we are. I think it looks okay.
Guilloche.
And that's the process of creating a security seal, or guilloche. So with that technique under our belts, let's take a look at the Photo VCarve toolpath that's within the software. Now please note, this is not the full program of the Photo VCarve, but simply the toolpath section of it. There are things within the Photo VCarve software that are not available within the toolpath section of both Aspire and VCarve. So first off, I have a picture, a favorite of mine, Alfred Hitchcock. You can adjust the contrast simply so you can see. I drew several vectors to segregate out certain parts of the portrait. I have his throat, I have the mouth area, the nose area, and then the top of the head. And each line follows along the contour of his face. You could see in this case the eyebrows and over the top of the ear, and of course the top of his head. So I have 4 sections that I've created. Just like I did previously, I'm going to draw a straight line vector and make multiple copies of it. You choose how many you would like. The wider they are, the harder it's going to be able to see the portrait when we're done. So they're going to have to be relatively close to one another. Selecting those vectors, I'm going to distort them between 2 curves, again, like I did previously, and hit apply. And if we look close, you can see how those vectors have been distorted to follow along the undulating lines of both the upper vector and the lower vector. I repeat this process for the remaining 3 sections of the portrait: the mouth area, the nose area, and the eyes, and of course the top of the head. I've created a boundary vector around the portrait, and again I'm going to use that delete tool, the clipping tool. So it's the same process, a little different end result, but the tools are the same. Once I've done this with the other 3 sections, I copy them all and those are the vectors I'm going to be using now for my Photo VCarve toolpath. This is just a brief introduction of this tool. I'll do another video with more in-depth information. But for now, here's the process. You have your vectors. I'm going to turn on my bitmap, and I'm going to use the regular small V-bit and use the selected vectors option and hit calculate. Of course, you need to have the bitmap selected for this to take effect. Hold the Shift key down, click on the picture, and now calculate. And preview this toolpath. And that's the end result of the Photo VCarve toolpathing option within the software. It's pretty impressive. The reason I combined both of these processes into one video is just in case I ever decided I wanted to create my own money. I would have my portrait ready for the center part of the bill, as well as my security seal. So, if we ever meet and I give you a $1,000 bill, you may want to take a second look at it. I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned a few tricks along the way. The lesson is take your time, constantly refreshing the images so you can see if it's coming out correctly, and learning to draw the vectors and use the tools within the software. And of course, to have fun. If you'd like to learn more about the software, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to click on the bell to be reminded of our new videos. And of course, as always, if you need help, send me an email, mm@mezalick.com. I'll be glad to help. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Enjoy.